That hoodie's cute, but the club level isn't for guests who wander in from the sidewalk. Step aside for the actual paying customers.
Ma'am, my reservation reference is BGN 74026, Master Hotel Services Agreement, room block 142 through 178. I'd like my key, please.
Sir, we get a lot of walk-ins who print things off the internet. I'll need to verify. Please step aside.
You know what, buddy? Why don't you come with me? We've got a real nice family services desk on the first floor. They'll take care of you until your daddy comes to find you. Take your hand off my son. Sir, I'm just doing my job. This child was unattended. Unattended? He was with me. He was 15 feet from my open door and I was watching him. Take your hand off my son.
Phones were already recording from 3 doorways. Somewhere in the ceiling, a camera blinked its red light steady. Somewhere on the second floor, a night duty manager was quietly moving a room reservation nobody had asked to move. And somewhere 22 hours away, at Nissan Stadium, 90,000 seats were waiting to find out that the man in the gray hoodie the Belcroft Grand Nashville had just decided did not belong in their lobby was the head coach of the football team playing the college football playoff semifinal, and that the hotel had a $42 million contract with his university. She did not know that yet. He did not tell her. The elevator on the far wall chimed. The doors opened. Nobody stepped out. The doors slid closed again. And the lock at the club-level elevator clicked twice. Then silence.
Silas did not step aside. He picked the confirmation slip back off the counter, folded it once along the same crease, and slid it into his pocket. He asked, without heat, without volume, whether Hera would be verifying the reservation now, or whether he should return with his son in 10 minutes. Hera's mouth did the thing mouths do when a person has been asked a question they were not expecting from a face they had already decided about. She said 10 minutes. Silas said thank you. He turned Ezra by the shoulders, walked him past the orchids, past the marble, past the concierge stand where Bruno Holloway's eyes tracked him the way a hand tracks a fly, and settled his son onto the low velvet bench near the fireplace. He crouched down until his eyes were level with his son's eyes. He did not speak. He waited. Ezra's lower lip did the small thing lower lips do when a 9-year-old is deciding whether to cry. His father brushed one thumb across the boy's cheekbone. He said only one sentence, and he said it the way he had said it every night for 3 years, ever since Naomi died in a hospice room in Alderwood on a Tuesday morning in October, her hand still warm in his hand. He said, "You are safe, and I am here." Ezra nodded. He did not cry. Instead, he opened his backpack, pulled out a spiral notebook with a wolf on the cover, and began drawing plays the way his father drew plays. Solid lines for the run, dotted lines for the pass, a small triangle for the quarterback. Silas watched him for a full minute. Then he sat back on the bench, pulled a thin manila folder from his own bag, and began stacking the papers inside it in a specific order, the order Naomi had taught him a decade ago when she was still an assistant director at a hospice and he was still an offensive line coach at a small school in Ohio. Depth chart on top, injury report next, weather forecast next, officials' assignments last. He folded each shirt in Ezra's overnight bag in thirds, the way Naomi had folded them, the way his son would fold them tomorrow when he grew up. That was the first thing anyone paying attention would have noticed about Silas Arden Foster. The precision, the stillness, the way his hand seemed to know where things went before his brain gave the order. From the concierge stand, Bruno Holloway watched him fold the shirt. Bruno did not know what he was seeing. Bruno had spent 5 years as a linebacker at a state school in Alabama and 11 years working private security in downtown Nashville. And in all those years, he had never once folded a shirt in thirds. What he saw, when he looked at Silas, was a man in a hoodie with a child sitting on a velvet bench in a $1,000-a-night lobby, and he decided the same thing he had decided about 11 other guests that year. This one did not belong. He mentioned it to Hera at 6:02 p.m. Hera mentioned it to to Oswald Marchand, the assistant general manager, at 6:04 p.m. Oswald pulled up the reservation on his terminal, saw the note Athletic Dept, Alderwood State, and said the thing men like Oswald always said when they wanted to slow something down without appearing to slow it down. He said, "Let's verify." Verification in Oswald Marchand's mouth was a weapon. He had a Master of Hospitality Management from a small college in Ohio, and a copy of the Tennessee Hotel Innkeeper Statute bookmarked on his desktop. He knew 10 Code ENG, Section 62-7-101 through 62-7-108 well enough to quote pieces of it in casual conversation, and he knew that no guest in the history of the Belcroft Grand had ever asked him to point to a specific subsection. He walked to the front desk at 6:11 p.m. He introduced himself to Silas with a handshake that was 2 seconds too long. He said the reservation was flagged for additional verification per hotel policy. He asked Silas for a government identification, a credit card matching the name on the reservation, and a purpose of stay declaration. Silas produced the identification. He produced the credit card. He looked at Oswald Marchand for a long, quiet moment, and he asked which section of the hotel policy required a purpose of stay declaration for a prepaid corporate room block. Oswald smiled the smile of a man who had been waiting for this question all week. He said it was hotel policy. Silas said he would like to see it in writing. Oswald said the policy binder was in the back office. Silas said he was happy to wait. Oswald was not happy to be told that Silas was happy to wait. His jaw did a thing his jaw did when he was going to actually retrieve the policy binder. He said he would be back in a moment. He was gone for 11 minutes. While he was gone, Ezra asked if he could go to the pool. Silas walked him to the concierge stand, where a young woman named Amethyst Rowe was checking the schedule. Amethyst had been at the Belcroft for 4 months. She was 23 years old, quiet, watchful, the kind of clerk who logged incidents into the system even when management told her not to. She smiled at Ezra. She said the family pool closed at 10 p.m. and was on the 4th floor. Before she could finish her sentence, Hera Ashcroft appeared at her elbow and said in a voice pitched exactly 1 register above pleasant that the pool was reserved for guests who had completed the check-in process, and Ezra should wait for an adult. Amethyst blinked. Ezra was standing next to an adult. His father was 3 feet away. Amethyst opened her mouth. Hera closed her mouth for her with a look. Silas thanked Amethyst by name. Amethyst noticed. She logged the interaction into her clerk terminal at 6:24 p.m. under the note, Guest Interaction, Room 3104, Family Services Inquiry. She did not tell her manager she had done this. 20 minutes later, when Oswald returned with the policy binder, that log entry would become the first receipt in a chain of receipts that would eventually cost the Belcroft Grand a $42 million contract. But at 6:24 p.m., nobody knew that yet, and the orchids stayed the color of dried blood in the polished half-light of a lobby that had not yet decided what it was about to become. If you have ever watched a father hold his composure while a room decided he did not belong, hit that like button now. It matters more than you know.
Oswald Marchand returned at 6:35 p.m., carrying a hotel policy binder that was 3 inches thick and had never once been opened by a guest. He set it on the counter with the ceremony of a lawyer setting down an exhibit. He opened it to a tab marked General Guest Services. He read the paragraph in a slow, deliberate voice, the voice of a man who wanted a child to hear his father being corrected. He said,
The Belcroft Grand reserves the right to require additional verification for prepaid corporate reservations at management's discretion in accordance with Tennessee Code Annotated, Section 62, Chapter 7. He did not read the next sentence because the next sentence said that additional verification was limited to the categories of identification, payment method, and party count, and that no innkeeper in the state of Tennessee had the authority to require a purpose of stay declaration from a lawfully checked-in guest. Silas knew this because Silas had spent the flight from Alderwood reading the Belcroft's own Master Hotel Services Agreement, Section 8.3, which incorporated the state innkeeper statute by reference. He did not say this. He said instead, "May I read the paragraph after the one you just read?" Oswald's face did the thing faces do when they are asked a question that reveals the ground has shifted. He said the binder was for staff reference only. Silas said the binder was posted, per state law, in the lobby on the placard behind the concierge stand. He turned his body a quarter turn and pointed at the placard. He read the paragraph aloud from 10 feet away without raising his voice, in the tone of a man who had done this before. He read the phrase "limited to identification, payment method, and party count" twice. He said once the word "procedure." He returned his eyes to Oswald Marchand's face. Oswald closed the binder. He said additional verification would not be necessary at this time. He said he apologized for the inconvenience. He did not smile. He walked back toward the back office. Hera Ashcroft watched him go. Bruno watched him go. Amethyst at the concierge stand watched him go, and she opened a second log entry in her clerk terminal at 6:41 p.m., and she typed in the notes field, "Guest cited posted lobby placard verbatim." She did not know why she was documenting this. She was documenting it because Naomi Arden Foster, when she was still alive, had told her friend Amethyst's mother one summer at a hospice fundraiser in Chattanooga that the difference between a good person and a person who mattered was that a person who mattered wrote things down. Amethyst had inherited that sentence from her mother without knowing where it came from. She wrote things down. She was about to write down a great deal more. Silas asked once politely whether he could now have the rollaway bed he had requested at check-in. Hera Ashcroft did what Hera Ashcroft did best. She said with a smile that was 3/4 teeth and no eyes, "I'll have to check occupancy policy, sir. Rollaway beds are restricted when a room is at maximum occupancy for a stated party." Silas said the room was booked for 2 guests and had a maximum occupancy of 4. Hera said she would have to verify with housekeeping. Silas said he would wait. Ezra tugged his father's hoodie sleeve. He whispered that he was hungry. His father crouched down. He said dinner was already comped. He said the mezzanine restaurant, Larkin's, had a reservation under their name at 7:15 p.m. He said Ezra could order the pancakes, even though it was dinner. Ezra smiled a very small smile, the first smile of the evening, and Silas felt something in his chest that had not moved in 3 years move once, quietly, and then settle. He stood up. He walked to the front desk. He asked Hera again in the same tone whether the rollaway was on its way. She said she was still verifying. He said thank you. He said he was going to dinner. He said the rollaway could be delivered to room 3014 while they were at the restaurant. Hera said she would try. Silas took Ezra's hand. They walked to the mezzanine.
Larkin's was the kind of restaurant that put candles on the tables, even at 6:50 p.m. The hostess, a young woman whose name tag read Cicely, looked at the reservation. She looked at Silas. She looked at Ezra. She looked back at Silas. She said the reservation had been noted as a family party, and she seated them at a 2-top behind a service pillar in the far back corner near the door to the kitchen, with a view of the busser station. Silas did not comment. He held Ezra's chair. He handed Ezra the children's menu. He asked the boy what he wanted. Ezra said pancakes. Ezra said with strawberries. Silas ordered him pancakes with strawberries. He ordered himself a black coffee and a chicken breast. He asked, quietly, whether the salt shakers on the busser station could be moved somewhere else because his son had a mild allergy to the powdered garlic they cross-contaminated with. Cicely said she would ask. She did not ask. The salt shakers stayed. Silas watched Ezra draw plays on the paper placemat. Ezra drew a running back sweeping left. Silas said, quietly, "Now draw the block." Halfway through the pancakes, a businessman at the bar 4 tables away began to raise his voice at a waitress. He was drunk. He was calling the waitress a name that Silas did not want his son to hear a second time. The waitress was 22 years old and trying to stay professional and failing. The busser near the pillar had frozen. The hostess was on the phone. There was no manager on the floor. Silas set down his coffee. He did not tell Ezra to look away. He said quietly, "Keep drawing." He stood up. He walked 11 steps unhurried until he was between the businessman and the waitress. He did not touch the businessman. He did not raise his voice. He said, in the voice of a man who had once talked a 19-year-old defensive tackle out of taking a swing at a referee, "Sir, you're going to sit down now, and you're going to let this young woman get you a water, and you're going to be very quiet about it, because your night is going to be much easier that way than the alternative." The businessman blinked. He sat down. The waitress mouthed thank you. She did not know Silas's name. He walked back to his son. He picked up his coffee. Ezra was watching him with wide eyes. Ezra said, "Dad, you moved fast." Silas said, "I didn't move fast. I moved first." Ezra thought about that. He nodded. He went back to drawing the block. 2 tables away, an older man in a Vanderbilt fleece watched Silas over the rim of a wine glass with an expression that Silas would only understand 3 hours later. The older man was a retired athletic trainer who had spent 9 years at a small school in Tallahassee that played Alderwood State 3 seasons ago in a bowl game. He was 98% sure he knew who Silas was. He was 98% sure he was wrong, because the head coach of Alderwood State would not be sitting at a 2-top behind a service pillar at Larkin's with a 9-year-old son in a hoodie 2 sizes too large. He looked back at his wine. The moment passed. Silas paid the bill in cash to avoid a second credit card hold. He took his son back to the elevator. He pressed the button for floor 30. The elevator did not open. The elevator opened for the couple next to him who had pressed the button for floor 12. It did not open for floor 30. Silas pressed the button again. He tried his room key. The key did not work. The couple looked at him with a look Silas had been looked at with for 42 years and pretended they had not been looked at with. They rode the elevator up to 12. Silas stood in the elevator alone with his son for 4 full seconds after the doors closed. Then he pressed the button for the lobby. He walked Ezra back to the front desk. It was 7:48 p.m. Hera Ashcroft was on a break. Oswald Marchand was in the back office. Amethyst Rowe was on shift. Silas asked her politely whether his room key had been deactivated. Amethyst pulled up the reservation. She typed. She frowned. She typed again. She said, in a voice that was quieter than her regular voice, that the reservation had been flagged for additional verification at 7:31 p.m. The verification was still pending. The key had been placed on temporary hold. She said she was very sorry. She said she could reissue a key if she waited for management approval. She said the approval would come from Kelvin Halbert, the night duty manager, who came on at 10 p.m. Silas said, "Thank you." He walked Ezra to the velvet bench. He sat down. He held his son's hand. Ezra whispered into his father's shoulder that he wanted to go home. Silas did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said quietly that they could not go home tonight, but they could go home tomorrow after the game, and that the game was still going to be the best day of the year, and that the hotel was just a hotel and did not get to decide anything important about them. Ezra nodded. He did not believe his father. His father knew he did not believe him. His father held his hand tighter. If this story has already reached into your chest, subscribe now. The next hour is going to earn your attention.
At 8:15 p.m., Kelvin Halbert arrived early. Kelvin was 39 years old, 5'10", permanently pale, with the kind of thin smile that never touched his eyes and a habit of tapping his knuckles on a countertop when he was about to do something he had already decided to do. He read the reservation flag. He read Harris' shift notes. He read Bruno's incident log, which described Silas as loitering in the lobby, uncooperative with verification, potentially a walk-in. Kelvin did not verify any of this. Kelvin walked to his desk in the back office. He pulled up the room assignment system. He looked at room 3014. He looked at the reservation reference number. He looked at the corporate account note. He typed one command. He moved the reservation from room 3014 to room 407, a service-adjacent single room on the 4th floor near the ice machine, with a queen bed and no view. He noted the reason as guest request, room compatibility. He time-stamped it 8:47 p.m. He did not tell anyone. He did not tell Silas. He did not tell the front desk. He did not tell Amethyst. He closed the reservation window. He tapped his knuckles on the desk twice. He walked out to check the lobby, and when he saw Silas and Ezra sitting on the velvet bench, he smiled at them the way a man smiles at a stain he had just decided to hide from the guests. He said, "Good evening, sir. I understand there's been some confusion with your reservation. If you'll give me just a few more minutes, we'll have everything sorted." Silas said, "Thank you." Silas did not know yet that his room had already been reassigned. Silas would not know this until 9:22 p.m., when he tried to use his key at the door of room 3014 and heard a woman inside the room ask in a startled voice who was there. He would apologize through the door. He would walk his son back to the elevator. He would return to the front desk. He would ask very calmly whether his room had been changed. Kelvin Halbert would smile his thin smile. He would say, "Yes, sir, it had been changed, to better accommodate your party's needs." Silas would ask why he had not been notified. Kelvin would say a courtesy call had been placed to his room. Silas would say the room had been in the process of being changed. Kelvin would smile his thin smile again. He would say, "Of course, sir." He would slide a new key across the counter. The room number on the sleeve would say 407. Silas would look at the number for one long moment. Then he would take the key. He would take his son's hand. He would walk to the elevator. He would press the button for floor 4. He would not raise his voice. At 9:51 p.m., Ezra asked if he could get a bag of pretzels from the vending machine on the 4th floor lobby. Silas said yes. He said, "Stay where I can see you." Ezra walked 12 feet down the hallway to the alcove where the vending machine sat next to the ice bucket. He fed $1 into the machine. He selected the pretzels. The pretzels dropped. He picked them up. He turned to walk back. Bruno Holloway was standing at the entrance to the alcove. Bruno was smiling. Bruno's smile was not the smile of a man who was pleased to see a child. Bruno's smile was the smile of a man who had been waiting all evening to have a reason to do something he had already decided to do. He said, "Hey there, buddy. Are you here with your daddy?" Ezra nodded. He did not speak. Bruno said, "Where is your daddy, buddy? You know you're not supposed to be walking around the hotel alone at night. It's not safe." Ezra pointed down the hall. His father was standing in the doorway of room 407, watching him. His father was 30 feet away. His father was already walking. Bruno said, "You know what, buddy? Why don't you come with me? We've got a family services desk on the 1st floor. Real nice people there. They'll take care of you until your daddy comes to find you." He reached out and put his hand on Ezra's shoulder.
Silas Arden Foster was there in 6 steps. He did not run, he walked. He walked the way he had walked from the tunnel to the sideline in a championship game 2 seasons ago, the walk of a man who has decided how the next 20 seconds will go and has not yet decided whether the other man in the walk will enjoy them. He stopped 3 feet from Bruno. He looked at Bruno's hand on his son's shoulder. He said one sentence in a voice quieter than the vending machine. "Take your hand off my son." Bruno did not take his hand off. Bruno said, "Sir, I'm just doing my job.
This child was unattended. Silas said, "He was 15 feet from my open door and I was watching him. Take your hand off my son." Bruno's grip did not change. Bruno said, "Sir, you need to step back." Silas did not step back. Silas took one small step forward. His right hand rose, slow and clear, in the space between Bruno's chest and his son's shoulder, and he closed his fingers, gentle as a hand closes on a doorknob, around Bruno's wrist. He did not squeeze, he did not twist, he held. He said once more, "Take your hand off my son." Bruno felt the hand on his wrist. Bruno was a former linebacker. Bruno knew, in the way a body knows things the brain has not yet named, that the man whose hand was on his wrist could break his wrist in one motion, and that the man whose hand was on his wrist was choosing not to. Bruno let go of Ezra's shoulder. Silas let go of Bruno's wrist. The whole exchange took 4 seconds. A woman in a bathrobe stepped out of room 411 with her phone already recording. A teenager on the far end of the hallway, waiting for the elevator, had his phone up too. A camera in the ceiling above the alcove blinked its red light steady. Ezra ran to his father. Silas put his son behind him. He did not raise his voice. He said to Bruno, "Please call your duty manager and your security supervisor and whoever handles police at this property right now." Bruno did not move. Bruno was breathing too fast. Bruno keyed his radio. Bruno said, "I need backup and MNPD on scene at the 4th floor east alcove. We have a physical altercation involving a guest." He did not say the guest had touched him first. He did not say he had touched the child first. He said, "Physical altercation involving a guest," and every word of that report would appear, verbatim, in an incident log that would be pulled by a civil rights attorney 6 months later, along with the video from the ceiling camera above the alcove. And the video from the ceiling camera above the alcove would show that Bruno had touched Ezra 13 seconds before Silas had touched Bruno's wrist, and Bruno would not remember when the deposition came, being able to explain that discrepancy. Officer Hector Malloy arrived 4 minutes later. He was 33, decorated, a Metro Nashville patrol officer working paid-off duty security at the Belcroft 1 weekend a month for the extra income. His body cam was already on. He had been trained to activate it when dispatched. He walked into the alcove. He saw Bruno breathing hard. He saw Silas standing calmly between his son and the security captain. He saw the phones recording. He asked what happened. Bruno spoke first. Bruno said the guest had assaulted him. Officer Malloy turned to Silas. Silas, quietly, in the voice of a man who had rehearsed this sentence in his head for the entire elevator ride down and had never actually expected to have to say it out loud. "Officer, before you take anyone's statement, please turn to your body cam and record the following. My name is Silas Arden Foster. I am a registered guest at this hotel. This security captain placed his hand on my 9-year-old son without my consent. I placed my hand on his wrist to remove his hand from my son. I did not squeeze, I did not injure. Under Title II of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, codified at 42 U.S.C. Section 2000A, and under 42 U.S.C. Section 1981, I am asserting my equal right to the full and equal enjoyment of the goods, services, facilities, privileges, advantages, and accommodations of this place of public accommodation, and my equal right to make and enforce the reservation contract that governs my stay. I am requesting that this incident be documented, that the ceiling camera footage from this alcove for the last 20 minutes be preserved, and that the internal reservation log for room 3014 be preserved. I will be filing a complaint with the Tennessee Human Rights Commission under Tennessee Code Annotated Title IV, Chapter 21. Officer Malloy stared at Silas for a long moment. He had been expecting a shouting match. He had gotten a legal citation delivered in a courtroom voice by a man in a gray hoodie standing on a hotel carpet on the 4th floor of a downtown Nashville hotel at 3 minutes past 10 p.m. on a Saturday night with a 9-year-old pressed against the back of his legs and phones filming from 3 different angles.
Officer Malloy did the only thing his training told him to do. He said, "Sir, I need you to step back and let me sort this out." Silas stepped back one step. He put his hand on his son's back. Ezra was crying now, silently, into his father's hoodie. Silas felt each small shudder against his ribs and did not turn to look, because if he turned to look, he would not be able to keep his hands as still as they needed to be. He kept his hands still. He watched Officer Malloy. He waited. If you're watching this and you have ever been the parent whose child was touched by a stranger, share this video with someone who needs to see it tonight.
Down on the second floor at 10:07 p.m., the ceiling camera at the lobby that covered the front desk and the elevator bank went dark for exactly 10 minutes and came back on at 10:17 p.m. The system log would later note the outage as scheduled maintenance. No maintenance had been scheduled, no technician had logged in. The camera came back on with the timestamp unbroken. Amethyst Rowe was the only person in the lobby who noticed. She noticed because she had been watching the monitor at her station when the feed for camera lobby 7 went to black, and she had noted the time in her terminal because that was what she did. She wrote at 10:08 p.m., "Camera lobby 7 offline. No work order in system." She wrote it in the notes field of a room she was not booking. She would forget she had written it until 11 days later, when a federal investigator would call her personal cell phone at 7:32 a.m. on a Wednesday morning and ask her, in a polite Georgia accent, whether she had noticed anything unusual about camera lobby 7 on the night of the incident. Amethyst would say yes. She would pull up the log entry. She would read it aloud. The federal investigator would thank her. Amethyst would ask, quietly, whether she should tell her manager she had spoken with a federal investigator. The federal investigator would say gently that she should not. Back on the fourth floor, Officer Malloy asked Bruno Holloway to step back. He asked Silas to step forward. He asked Silas for identification. Silas produced his driver's license. Officer Malloy read the name. He read it twice. He asked Silas what he did for a living. Silas said he worked for Alderwood State University. Officer Malloy asked in what capacity. Silas paused for one full second. He said, "I coach the football team." Officer Malloy blinked. He looked at his body cam. He looked at Bruno. He looked at Silas. He looked at Ezra. He looked at his radio. He keyed his radio. He said, "Dispatch, this is Malloy. Cancel the assault call. Code 4. No further units required. I'll handle documentation on scene." Then he looked at Silas Arden Foster, and he said in a voice much smaller than the voice he had used to enter the alcove, "Coach, would you mind coming with me down to the office? I think we need to have a longer conversation." Silas took his son's hand. His son's hand was still shaking. He looked at Bruno Holloway. He looked at the camera above the alcove. He looked at the woman in the bathrobe still recording from her doorway. He said quietly, "Officer, I'll come to the office, but my son doesn't leave my sight, and I want the general manager, the head of security, and the corporate legal contact for Belcroft Hospitality Group on a call within the next 30 minutes, or I make a phone call of my own." Officer Malloy nodded once. He said, "Yes, Coach." The elevator doors closed at 10:23 p.m. Bruno Holloway stood alone in the alcove with the vending machine humming behind him and the pretzels still uneaten on the floor. He looked at his wrist. He looked at the ceiling camera. He did not know yet that his shift log was already being read by a 19-year-old in Ohio who ran a college football rumor account with 300,000 followers, who had just been sent a video by a woman in a bathrobe, and who was about to caption it with a screenshot of Silas's face and the words, "Wait, is this actually Coach Arden Foster?" He did not know yet that Amethyst Rowe had already exported the room reassignment log to her personal cloud storage at 10:29 p.m.
He did not know yet that in the back office of the Belcroft Grand Nashville, on the desk of Kelvin Halbert, a stack of shift notes were about to be very carefully reorganized. He knew only that his wrist still felt where the hand had closed around it, and that the hand had chosen not to close all the way, and that whatever was about to happen to him next, the man in the gray hoodie had known for at least an hour that it was coming. The elevator hummed. The floor indicator blinked. The lobby waited. Somewhere on floor 30, a room key card sat unused in a slot it had already been removed from, and in a room on floor 4 that Silas Arden Foster had never asked for, a rollaway bed that had never been delivered sat, uncomplaining, in a warehouse across the river, its purpose still pending, its verification still incomplete. Ezra whispered into his father's shoulder, "Dad, is the game still tomorrow?" His father said, "The game is still tomorrow." Ezra said, "Are you still the coach?" He did not answer for a full 2 seconds. Then he said quietly, "Son, I have always been the coach. They just haven't figured that out yet." The elevator reached the lobby, the doors opened, and in the marble and orchid light of the Belcroft Grand Nashville, at 10:24 p.m. on a Saturday in January, the 22 hours before kickoff at Nissan Stadium, began their slow, unstoppable turn toward morning.
The elevator opened onto marble that no longer looked expensive. Silas walked out first. Ezra walked out second, small fingers curled inside his father's curled. Officer Malloy walked out third. Kelvin Halbert was already standing at the front desk with the thin smile stapled to his face and a leather folder tucked under one arm. He gestured toward the back office with an open palm and an "If you'll follow me, sir," and Silas said, in a voice that had climbed exactly no decibels since the alcove, that the conversation would happen at the front desk in view of the lobby cameras, or it would not happen at all. Kelvin's smile lost a millimeter. He walked around the counter. He opened his leather folder. Amethyst Rose, standing 3 feet away at the concierge terminal, opened a fresh incident log at 10:29 p.m. and began transcribing every sentence that crossed the counter in real time. Nobody told her not to. Silas asked, once, for 4 things. He asked for a printed copy of the reservation as it currently existed in the system. He asked for a printed copy of the room reassignment log with timestamps. He asked for the name and direct number of Belcroft Hospitality Group's on-call corporate legal contact. He asked for the preservation of every ceiling camera feed on floors 1 and 4 from 6 p.m. Saturday through the moment the request was being made. Kelvin said the corporate legal contact was not available on a Saturday night. Silas said that was interesting because the Master Hotel Services Agreement between Alderwood State University and Belcroft Hospitality Group required a 24-hour corporate legal contact under Section 11.2. He recited the section by memory. Kelvin's pen stopped moving on the notepad. Behind him, Amethyst quietly hit export on the room reassignment log for the 3rd time that evening, this time to a cloud folder she had opened 4 months ago and titled, without irony, "Things I Wrote Down." Silas took Ezra back to room 407 at 11:11 p.m. He did not turn on the overhead light. He washed his son's face. He tucked Ezra into the queen bed because the rollaway had never arrived. He sat in the armchair by the window and watched his son breathe. At 3:17 a.m., when the breathing had evened out and stayed even, he opened his laptop. He drafted an email to Athletic Director Anderson Reyes and University President Dr. Fiona Halewood. He attached a chronological incident summary, the screenshot Amethyst had exported at 10:29 p.m., which she had emailed to a personal address he did not yet know she also controlled, the room reassignment timestamp, the statute citations, and a paragraph that began with the phrase, "I would prefer to handle this internally, but I do not believe that option is available anymore." He did not send it. He set it to draft. He watched his son breathe until the sky over the river turned the color of pewter. At 6 a.m. Sunday, he ran. He ran along the river for 4 miles, the way he ran every morning, gray hoodie zipped to the throat, breath steady, mind quiet. Ezra was still asleep when he returned. He showered. He folded the game day shirt in thirds. He stacked the day's papers in the order Naomi had taught him. He ordered coffee to the room. The runner who brought the coffee was a man in his early 60s, Silas would later learn, whose name tag read Otis. Otis set the tray on the small table by the window. He straightened. He looked at Silas for a long second. He said, "Good morning, Mr. Foster, sir. There's been a mistake somewhere in this house, and I want you to know not all of us are part of it." He did not wait for a response. He nodded once at Ezra's sleeping form. He left. Silas held the doorframe for the full 10 seconds after the door clicked shut. Then he poured coffee for one. If this is the kind of story you needed to hear this year, hit that like button. It travels farther than you think.
At 9:03 a.m., the team bus turned into the loading dock at the back of the Belcroft Grand. Ivory Halston, the Timberwolves' head athletic trainer, walked in through the service entrance with a duffel bag on her shoulder and a schedule in her hand. She cut through the back hallway toward the elevators. She passed the concierge stand. She stopped walking. She turned her head slowly. Silas was standing near the coffee cart in the corner of the lobby, one hand on Ezra's back, the other holding a cup of coffee he had not yet sipped. Ivory's mouth did the thing mouths do when the pieces of a puzzle a person has been assembling for 11 hours suddenly assemble themselves without her. She walked over. She did not raise her voice. She said, "Coach, why are you standing in the lobby?" Silas said, "It's a long story. It'll wait." Ivory said, "It will not wait." She pulled out her phone. She sent one text to Anderson Reyes. The text was 3 words. Anderson Reyes was already in his car. At 9:11 a.m., a Sunday morning national broadcast running on the lobby television cut from a highlight package to a live pregame segment. The anchor read from a graphic that had gone up on his monitor 30 seconds earlier. He said, "And we're getting reports out of downtown Nashville this morning that Alderwood State head coach Silas Arden Foster was involved in some kind of hotel altercation last night at the Belcroft Grand, where the Timberwolves are staying for tonight's semifinal. Sources close to the program say Coach Arden Foster and his young son were subject to what they're describing as a serious incident involving hotel staff. We'll bring you more as this develops." A photograph appeared on the screen behind the anchor's shoulder. The photograph was 3 years old. It showed Silas at a press conference wearing the same gray hoodie on the day he had been introduced as head coach. Hera Ashcroft was on shift. She had come in at 8 a.m. to close out the Saturday reports. She was standing at the front desk holding a printed occupancy sheet in one hand and a cup of hot tea in the other. She looked up at the television. She looked at the photograph. She looked at the man standing near the coffee cart in the corner of her lobby. Her hand opened. The cup of tea fell. It broke on the marble at her feet in a splash the color of a bruise. Anderson Reyes walked through the front doors at 9:17 a.m. He was 6'2", silver at the temples, wearing a black overcoat and the kind of expression athletic directors wear when they are about to detonate a contract. He walked straight through the lobby, past the broken teacup, past Hera Ashcroft's frozen hand, past Bruno Holloway, who had just come on shift and had not yet been told that his employment was already being reviewed by 3 separate offices, and up to Silas. He did not shake his coach's hand. He put both his hands on Silas's shoulders. He said, "Coach." "Anderson." Anderson looked at Ezra. He said, "Buddy, are you okay?" Ezra nodded. Anderson said, "Good, man." Then he turned and looked at Hera Ashcroft the way a man looks at a wall he is about to walk through. Dr. Fiona Halewood's call came in on Anderson's phone at 9:22 a.m. Anderson put her on speakerphone. He set the phone on the front desk. He asked Hera to summon her general manager and her ownership group chairman in that order in the next 5 minutes, or Alderwood State University would be invoking Section 14.1, subsection C of the Master Hotel Services Agreement, which permitted immediate termination for cause. Hera did not move. Anderson said the words immediate termination a second time. Hera picked up the desk phone. The chairman of Belcroft Hospitality Group came on the line at 9:29 a.m. from a golf course in Sarasota. Silas took the call. He did not raise his voice. He read the incident timeline back in 3 minutes and 11 seconds. He referenced Title II of the Civil Rights Act at 42 U.S.C. Section 2000. He referenced 42 U.S.C. Section 1981. He referenced the Tennessee Human Rights Act at Tennessee Code Annotated Section 4/21-501. He referenced the Tennessee Consumer Protection Act at Section 47-18-104. He referenced Section 11.2 and Section 14.1 of the Master Hotel Services Agreement. He said the words preservation of evidence 3 times. He said the words pattern and practice once. When he was finished, the chairman of Belcroft Hospitality Group, a man who had not been spoken to in that tone by anyone under the age of 70 in 15 years, cleared his throat and said, "Coach Arden Foster, on behalf of Belcroft Hospitality Group, I want to apologize personally." Silas said thank you. He said the apology was noted. He said the apology did not resolve the matter. He said his athletic director would be in touch by close of business Monday.
The formal termination notice for the Master Hotel Services Agreement was delivered to Belcroft Hospitality Group at 11:11 a.m. Monday morning. $42 million over 7 years, invoked and pulled in 1 page. 2 staff members were placed on paid administrative leave pending investigation, Bruno Holloway and Kelvin Halbert. Not fired, not on the spot. The Belcroft's general counsel was too experienced for that. Hera Ashcroft and Oswald Marchand received written reprimands and were reassigned to non-guest-facing roles pending an internal review that everyone involved understood would take between 4 and 6 months and would produce, at best, a policy binder rewrite and a mandatory retraining module nobody would remember completing. The Tennessee Human Rights Commission opened a charge under 10 Code AN, Section 4-21-501 within 72 hours. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division opened a preliminary Title II inquiry within the month. The Belcroft Hospitality Group's remaining 12 properties were quietly placed under a portfolio-wide compliance audit by the same civil rights firm Anderson Reyes retained for the university. Officer Hector Malloy's body cam footage was preserved. His off-duty conduct was referred to Metro Nashville Police Department Internal Affairs. The IA outcome would be listed as pending for 11 months and then, in the way these things go, administratively closed with no adverse finding, a phrase Malloy's own union representative would quietly celebrate over a beer. None of it was clean. None of it was fast. None of it fixed anything the way a story wants things to be fixed. 2 men were suspended, not fired. 1 contract was terminated, not enforced. 3 investigations opened, one of which would close with a footnote, one of which would close with a settlement and an NDA, and one of which would still be open 18 months later, when the season had ended, when Ezra had turned 10, when the Belcroft Grand had installed a new front desk manager who would spend her first 3 months undoing decisions Hera Ashcroft had made and would never quite finish. At 12:41 p.m. Sunday, Silas Arden Foster knelt on the concrete floor of the visiting team tunnel at Nissan Stadium. He adjusted the oversized hoodie on his son's shoulders. He tightened the strap on Ezra's field pass. He put both hands on the sides of his son's face. He said, "You know where the family box is." Ezra said, "Section 112, row 4, seat 8. Silas said, "You know who is sitting with you." Ezra said, "Auntie Ivory and Mr. Otis." Silas paused. He said, "Mr. Otis?" Ezra nodded. He said, "The coffee man. He drove up. He said he owed you." Silas held his son's face for one long second more. He said, "Go win your day, buddy." Ezra said, "Dad, did we win?" Silas said, "The game hasn't started yet." Kickoff was at 1:05 p.m. Share this story with somebody who needs the reminder that the coach in the gray hoodie is still the coach. 3 unresolved threads remained. The first was a phone call Amethyst Rowe received at 7:48 p.m. the following Wednesday from an unlisted number. The voice on the other end identified himself as a vice president at Belcroft Hospitality Group. He said he wanted to meet privately, off property, no need to loop in her manager, just a conversation. Amethyst thanked him. She did not agree to a meeting. She hung up. She wrote down the time and the phone number in a notebook she had started keeping in her purse. The second was the 10 minutes of ceiling camera footage from Lobby 7 that went dark at 10:07 p.m. Saturday and returned at 10:17 p.m. with no maintenance log, no technician sign-in, no explanation in the system. Nobody would ever fully explain those 10 minutes. The federal investigator would flag them. The internal audit would flag them. Belcroft's IT contractor would issue a 2-page memo blaming a network handoff error. Nobody who read the memo would believe it. The third was Kelvin Halbert, who resigned quietly from the Belcroft on the Wednesday after the incident with a modest severance and a non-disparagement clause, and who turned up 3 weeks later working as a night duty manager at a competitor property in Memphis using a slightly different spelling of his last name. At 1:03 p.m., standing at the mouth of the tunnel with the roar of 90,000 people rolling down the concrete toward him like weather, Silas Arden Foster's phone buzzed in the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled it out. The screen showed a number with no name attached. He looked at it for 2 full seconds. Then he slid the phone back into his pocket. He would return the call after the game. Whoever it was would wait. He walked out of the tunnel. The Timberwolves ran behind him, and somewhere in section 112, row 4, seat 8, a 9-year-old boy in a hoodie 2 sizes too large stood up on his seat to see his father better and clapped and did not stop clapping. And next to him, a coffee runner named Otis quietly wiped his eyes and pretended he was not. The scoreboard clock ticked to 1500. The game had not yet started.